Well, I thought that I would read a little bit of the story that is hopefully soon, in the not so distant future, to be released. I've been working on it for some time. It's a novella, and really I have it finished, but I did it, I wrote it by hand and then I tried to copy it, which is really not the easiest thing to do. So from hand and then copying it into sort of a way of making EPUB format through a computer program. But I thought I would read a piece of it. It is a science fiction novella about a young person who lives on a planet far away who's witnessing the events on his planet. His planet is basically, the story is about how a government or a state can keep people in sort of in kind of like a state of a lack of awareness, like a mind control in a way, but more like a stupor. So they walk around and they don't hardly know what's going on, kind of like today. And there's a war going on, which is fought rather mechanically, using very little in the way of actual manpower, far away. And the war that's being fought is, of course, against, and it happens to be in the story against Earth, because these people are out for conquest, but they always make it seem as though they're not. Anyway, we'll pick it up sort of in the middle towards the end of the story, and I'll just give a little piece of it. So I'll begin reading, and hopefully I can read through without having too many stutters or problems. You see, Tom began to see a picture developing within his mind about this place and the events that brought him here. He wasn't sure how many of them realized it either. Did Ilium himself even know? He was seeing a picture of a camp for wayward rogues cleverly designed by the state that allowed the renegades the illusion of being true dissidents, while all the time being prisoners of the state. Not only that, but the state also allowed them to carry out their little stunts, like the one in the square. In essence, whether they knew it or not, they were working for the state. Of course, it was more complex than that. They were working from elements within the state. These elements or groups were losing their domination over exact. So not only was it convenient for them to occasionally allow a stunt like the one in the square to push the people who were slipping out of the trance back into the arms of the state, but also allowed Tom's home planet to go on a search for enemies among the planets rising to power. Tom decided he had to escape. But how? He covertly gave this some thought. He knew that by the very realization of this manufactured reality, he could still be a prisoner within this confinement camp. After pondering just how he was going to make his escape, it then occurred to him he didn't know where he would go if he did. How would he survive? Where would he survive? And just how would he get beyond the electrified barrier? He couldn't use the tunnel even if he could slip beyond the guards. The tunnel only led back to the town and his old life. He had to hone his abilities in order to pass through the electrified barrier and to avoid detection long enough to put some distance between himself and the place he now found himself in. He would worry about how to survive after his escape. He began scanning and accessing different levels of his brainwave patterns, attempting to leave an imprint for the colony, so they would believe he was still among them, even after his escape. He didn't know how long he could maintain this illusion, but he knew he had the ability needed to do it eventually. He began to see that he couldn't disable the electrified barrier without being detected, so he decided to focus on ways to ignore the pain it would cause as he went through. He knew that he could repair any physical damage, especially nerve damage, afterwards. His mental abilities were becoming as such that he could heal his physical self to an extent. This, as with the chip, could be done by focusing on a nerve or certain groups of nerves. He decided to try his escape that night. He would bring a few changes of clothes, as well as the clothes he was wearing when he was brought to the camp. More important though, he could bring some of the root vegetables, as he planned on eventually setting up his own property for growing crops to live on. As he knew he was reaching a level where he could establish a security perimeter and begin to develop his own homestead, as it were. It seemed to Tom that either the state wasn't as smart as they pretended to be, or perhaps he, even after his determined decision to escape, might still be on some sort of path laid out by the state. He went back and forth as to which point of view was the correct one, but he decided, since he had already decided on a plan, he couldn't become bogged down with this sort of thinking. The only thing he struggled about before he set out that night was whether or not to take a few of the parchments he had been reading. He felt guilty about it, but there was one he felt compelled to finish. He decided against it because he suspected, putting aside his guilt, that it might be chipped in some way he as yet hadn't discovered. He knew he would have to take some food though. He felt guilty about this as well, but knew he was going to have a hard enough time finding food at first anyway. He took very little though, perhaps enough to sustain himself for 3 days or so. Somewhere between late night and early morning, his mental abilities working at their fullest, perhaps stretched to the limit to conceal his absence, he walked beyond the far end of the electrified barrier, through the pain, and out to freedom.